Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time we're going to be tackling a pretty hot topic:
Yeah.
the CFPB's final rule on Section 171 of Dodd-Frank.
Huge.
So this is all about trying to shed light on small business lending practices,
Right.
particularly for those owned by women, minorities, and LGBTQI plus individuals.
Absolutely.
We're going to be diving straight into the source material here, which is excerpts from the final rule itself.
Awesome.
So get ready for some pretty interesting details.
I think the most interesting part about this one is kind of the context behind it.
Yeah.
Section 171 was created to address concerns that these groups were facing discriminatory lending practices.
Right.
And there's been a lack of transparency in the market, which has made it difficult to even identify potential bias, let alone, address
Right.
it.
Right. And it's not just some, abstract concept either, right? We're talking about real world impact here.
Exactly.
I mean, you remember that statistic about median family wealth back in 2019? White families at $188,000, $200.
Right.
Black families at $24,100, and Hispanic families at $36,100.
Right.
Those disparities are deeply intertwined with who gets access to credit and on what terms.
Exactly. And so this rule really has two main goals.
Okay.
So the first one is fair lending enforcement.
Okay.
So using this new data to identify and shut down any discriminatory practices.
So it's about holding lenders accountable.
Right.
Got it. So what's the second goal?
The second one is community development.
Okay.
This data will help policymakers and community groups understand the credit needs and gaps in specific areas.
Interesting.
Imagine being able to pinpoint where the money isn't flowing, not just where it is.
Right.
That's powerful for targeting resources.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. But does this rule apply to every single loan and every single lender out there?
Not quite. It focuses on specific types of credit transactions. So things like loans, lines of credit, credit cards,
Okay.
even merchant cash advances and agricultural loans. So imagine like a farmer seeking financing for their crops.
Right.
Or a small business owner needing a cash flow boost. Those are covered.
That's a pretty wide range.
Yeah,
But what about things like, say, factoring?
good point.
I know some businesses use that to kind of get quick cash.
Factoring isn't considered a covered credit transaction under this rule.
Okay.
Same with leases.
Okay.
And this is a big one. Loans already reported under the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act, even if the lender isn't subject to HMDA reporting, are exempt.
Interesting. So why exclude those loans?
Yeah.
Isn't that a potential blind spot in the data?
The Bureau acknowledges that this does create some data gaps,
Okay.
but they argue that the trade-off is a simpler reporting system,
Huh.
Fewer headaches for everyone involved, which ultimately makes compliance more likely.
That's fair.
Yeah.
So, okay, we know what loans are covered. What about the lenders?
Yeah.
Who exactly has to report all this data?
It primarily targets banks and credit unions
Okay.
that hit a certain volume of small business loans. Okay.
The threshold is 100 loans annually for 2 consecutive years.
Interesting.
They did consider a lower threshold of 50 loans, but ultimately decided against it.
So it sounds like smaller community banks that only make a few business loans each year are probably off the hook.
Probably, yeah.
But that kind of raises the question, what are we missing by excluding those smaller lenders?
Right.
They might have unique lending patterns
Yeah.
or serve very specific communities.
Uh-huh.
It's a potential piece of the puzzle we're not capturing.
Exactly.
And speaking of definitions, how does the rule define a small business?
Good question.
I'm sure there are lots of different interpretations out there.
They went with a revenue-based definition.
Okay.
Businesses with $5 million or less in gross annual revenue
Okay.
in the previous fiscal year.
So last year's revenue.
Correct.
Okay.
This aligns with the Small Business Act, but it did spark debate.
Really?
Some argued that this threshold was too high, missing truly small businesses.
Others felt that it captured the intended scope of this data collection.
Yeah, 5 million does seem like a lot for some industries.
Right.
So is that definition set in stone?
Not entirely.
Yeah.
They built in adjustments for inflation every 5 years starting in 2030.
Okay.
And each adjustment will be rounded to the nearest $500,000 for simplicity.
Got it.
So it's not completely static, but that initial bar is set pretty high.
Okay, so we know who's in and who's out, but what information are we actually talking about here?
Right.
What's getting collected?
The rule mandates collecting a range of data points about both the applicant and the loan itself.
Okay.
So some are pretty straightforward, like loan type, amount requested, interest rate, fees,
Okay, makes sense.
whether the application was approved or denied.
Right.
But others delve into potentially sensitive territory.
You're talking about the demographic data,
Right.
the ethnicity, race, and sex of the principal owners,
Mm-hmm.
and whether the business is minority-owned, women-owned, or LGBTQI plus owned. That's where things get really interesting
Right.
and complex.
Absolutely. This is where the rule sparked the most heated discussions.
Okay.
There were concerns about privacy, accuracy, and the burden on lenders.
Uh-huh.
Think about it.
Yeah.
How do you collect this information accurately?
Right.
Especially in a busy retail environment.
Yeah.
How do you ensure it's not misused?
Right.
These are real challenges the Bureau had to grapple with.
And I bet some folks suggested collecting even more data.
Yes, there were suggestions to collect credit scores
Okay.
and disability status.
Interesting.
But the Bureau decided against those,
Okay.
drawing a line in the sand.
Okay, so choosing their battles, so to speak.
Right.
Okay, let's dive into those concerns about the demographic data.
Okay.
How does the rule address privacy?
Right.
Especially in a face-to-face setting like a retail branch,
Yeah.
that could get awkward fast.
They emphasize voluntary disclosure.
Okay.
Applicants can choose not to provide this information.
Okay.
It's not mandatory.
So that removes some of the pressure from those uncomfortable situations.
Right.
That's a good start. But what about preventing lenders from using this information to discriminate?
Yeah.
How do you stop that from happening?
So they have several safeguards in place.
Okay.
The first is separate record keeping.
Right.
This demographic data must be kept entirely separate from the loan application itself.
Okay.
It's not just a separate section on a form,
Uh-huh.
but two completely different records.
Okay, so a wall between the sensitive data and the loan decision.
Right.
What else?
They also have what are called firewall provisions,
Correct.
requiring lenders to prevent the demographic data from being used in credit decisions.
Uh-huh.
So imagine a loan officer is evaluating an application.
Yeah.
They shouldn't even be able to see that information.
Wow, that's pretty strict.
Yeah.
Are there any exceptions to that firewall?
Yes. One, employees who need access for specific purposes,
Okay.
like fair lending compliance,
Yeah.
are allowed.
Yep.
It makes sense. Someone whose job it is to ensure the bank isn't discriminating
Mm-hmm.
needs to be able to see the data.
Okay, that seems reasonable. But even with those safeguards,
Yeah.
collecting the sensitive information in a busy retail setting just seems like a recipe for awkwardness.
You're right.
I mean, imagine trying to have that conversation quickly and efficiently
Yeah.
while also making sure that no bias creeps in.
Uh-huh.
It just seems tough.
It's a challenge. And the Bureau acknowledged that,
Yeah.
collecting this information, especially in those retail environments, is challenging.
Right.
They were aiming to balance the need for data with the reality of these interactions.
Okay.
And there was a lot of feedback about, the potential for discomfort
Right.
or bias creeping in,
Yeah.
especially given the need for speed and efficiency in retail settings.
Did they offer any specific guidance
Not real.
on navigating those situations?
And that was one of the criticisms of the rule. Some felt the Bureau was passing the buck, leaving lenders to figure out the practicalities on their own,
Uh-huh.
which, it's a valid point.
Yeah.
Clear guidance on how to handle those tricky situations could be really helpful.
Right. It's all well and good to have these rules on paper, but the real world is messy.
Yeah.
So we've got the what and the who. Now let's talk timing.
Okay.
When do lenders actually have to start complying with all of this?
They used a phased approach,
Yeah, okay.
acknowledging that different lenders have different capacities to adapt.
Sure.
Larger institutions have a tighter timeline, while smaller ones get more breathing room.
I like that it seems fairer than a one-size-fits-all deadline.
Yeah.
So who goes first?
The largest lenders, those originating 2,500 or more covered transactions in both 2022 and 2023,
Okay.
had a deadline of October 1, 2024.
Okay.
But there's a quirk to it.
Okay.
They only had to collect data for a partial year,
Okay.
from October 1st through December 31st.
So a bit of a ramp-up period.
Right, a soft launch.
Okay, makes sense. What about everyone else?
Mid-size lenders, those doing between 102,499 transactions,
Okay.
have until April 1st, 2025.
And the smallest lenders?
Those originating between 50 and 99 transactions get the longest runway,
Okay.
April 1st, 2026.
So the bigger you are, the sooner you have to comply.
Right. It makes sense from a resource perspective.
But I bet those deadlines still cause some anxiety out there.
You're right.
Yeah.
The CFPB received a lot of feedback,
Uh-huh.
many arguing for longer implementation periods across the board.
Okay.
Smaller institutions especially voiced concerns about having enough time to adapt their systems and train their staff.
Right.
But the Bureau felt that these deadlines struck a balance between urgency and feasibility.
Okay, so now we're getting to the heart of the matter. All of this data.
Right?
The CFPB is requiring.
Yeah.
What happens to it?
Good question.
They're not just going to file it away, are they?
Definitely not. Transparency is a big part of this rule.
Okay.
The plan is to make the data public, but with a major caveat:
I love a good caveat. Tell me more.
privacy.
Okay.
The CFPB is walking a tightrope here.
Okay.
They want to make the data available for research analysis, public scrutiny,
Mm-hmm.
but they also have to protect the businesses and individuals involved.
Look
It's
at
a
that.
classic balancing act.
Transparency versus privacy. That's a tough one.
Yeah.
How do they plan to do that?
The rule states that they'll make modifications and deletions
Okay.
before releasing the data publicly.
Okay.
So think of it as trying to anonymize the data,
Uh-huh.
make it harder to connect back to specific people.
Okay, so not just dumping the raw data out there for everyone to see?
Exactly.
Okay.
They might group data into ranges,
Okay.
suppress small numbers to prevent identifying specific businesses, or even redact certain information altogether.
Interesting.
It's about finding ways to make the data usable without compromising privacy.
That sounds complicated.
It is.
I bet there were a lot of opinions on how to do that effectively.
You're right. The Bureau's approach to privacy sparked a lot of pushback.
Okay.
Some stakeholders felt that the proposed rule didn't go far enough to protect privacy,
Wow.
while others wanted more transparency about how those modifications would be made.
Right.
It was a point of contention, to say the least.
So a lot of different perspectives on how to handle this sensitive data.
Yeah.
And it sounds like the CFPB has some work to do to build trust
Mm-hmm.
and ensure that this data is used responsibly.
Right.
I'm eager to hear more about the potential benefits and costs.
Yeah.
But I think this is a good spot to pause for now.
Yeah, it's a complex issue, but that's for sure. Finding that balance between transparency and privacy is crucial,
Yeah.
especially when you consider the potential benefits
Right.
this rule could bring to the small business lending landscape.
And I think it's easy to get lost in the weeds with all of these details about deadlines and definitions.
Right.
We need to zoom out and remember the why behind all of this.
Absolutely.
This rule didn't just appear out of thin air. This is the result of years of advocacy research and debate
Yeah,
about making lending fairer.
absolutely. There's a reason Section 1071 was included in Dodd-Frank.
Right.
Congress recognized that women-owned, minority-owned, and LGBTQI+-owned businesses often face barriers that others don't.
Right.
And those barriers weren't just anecdotal. They were
Yes.
backed by data and research.
Yeah. Higher interest rates, tougher lending standards, sometimes even outright discrimination.
Right.
It wasn't a level playing field.
Yeah, right.
And this data collection effort is about shining a light on those disparities
Absolutely.
so we can understand the scope of the problem and start to fix it.
Exactly. It's about holding lenders accountable, yes.
Uh-huh.
But it's also about empowering communities and policymakers
Okay.
with the data they need to advocate for change
Right.
and to target resources effectively.
Yeah.
Imagine being able to pinpoint exactly which communities are being underserved by lenders.
Right.
That's powerful information.
It's like giving advocates the ammunition they need to push for more equitable lending practices.
Right.
But data alone isn't enough.
Yeah.
What are some concrete ways this rule could make things better for small businesses,
Right.
especially those owned by women, minorities, and LGBTQI+ individuals?
Yeah.
What are you most optimistic about?
I think one of the most exciting aspects is the potential for market transparency to drive positive change.
Okay.
When lenders know that their practices are being tracked and made public, they're more likely to ensure that they're treating all borrowers fairly.
Right.
No one wants to be seen as discriminatory
Yeah.
or out of step with the market.
So a little bit of healthy competition
Right.
and peer pressure.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
for borrowers, this data could be incredibly empowering.
Okay.
Imagine being able to compare interest rates, fees, even approval rates
Wow.
across different lenders and demographic groups.
Right.
You can make more informed decisions about where to seek financing.
That's a game changer.
Right.
It puts the power in the hands of the borrower, allowing them to shop around for the best terms and hold lenders accountable.
Exactly. And from a broader perspective,
Yeah.
This increased transparency could lead to the development of more innovative and inclusive financial products and services.
Right.
When lenders have better data about the needs and challenges of different demographic groups, they can tailor their products accordingly.
So not just relying on one-size-fits-all solutions,
Right.
but actually understanding the unique needs of different communities.
Exactly.
That could open up a whole new world of possibilities for entrepreneurs who haven't had access to traditional lending channels.
Precisely. And that's what makes me optimistic about this rule's potential.
Yeah.
It's about more than just data. It's about creating a more inclusive and vibrant small business sector where everyone has a fair shot at success.
I love that it's a vision worth striving for.
Right.
But of course, we have to be realistic about the potential downsides.
Yeah.
We've talked about the compliance burden on lenders, the possibility of higher interest rates for borrowers, and even the risk that some lenders might just stop making small business loans altogether. What are your thoughts on those concerns?
Those are valid concerns,
Yeah.
and they highlight the complexity of this issue.
Yeah.
There's always a risk of unintended consequences
Yeah.
when you implement a rule of this magnitude.
Right.
But I think it's important to remember that the Bureau carefully considered these risks and weighed them against the potential benefits.
Yeah.
They didn't make these decisions lightly.
They held countless hearings and gathered feedback from all sorts of stakeholders before finalizing this rule. They were trying to strike that balance between progress and practicality.
Exactly. And they also built in some safeguards,
Okay.
like the phased implementation timeline to give lenders time to adapt. It's not about throwing everyone into the deep end all at once.
That makes sense. And it sounds like ongoing communication and collaboration will be key here.
Absolutely.
The CFPB can't just set this rule in motion and walk away.
Right.
They need to be partners with lenders,
Yeah.
helping them navigate the challenges and ensure the rule achieves its intended goals.
I agree. The Bureau has already released a ton of resources, FAQs, fact sheets, even webinars
Wow.
to help lenders understand the rule and prepare for implementation.
Right.
But it's an ongoing process. They need to stay engaged and responsive to the needs and concerns of lenders,
Okay.
especially those smaller institutions that might be struggling to adapt.
And we can't forget about the borrowers in all of this.
Right.
What can they do to protect themselves and make sure that their voices are heard?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I think first and foremost, borrowers need to be informed. They need to understand this rule, what it means for them and their rights when applying for a loan.
Okay.
If they're asked to provide demographic information, they have the right to decline. But it's important they know why that information is being collected and how it will be used.
So informed consent is crucial.
Absolutely.
Borrowers need to feel empowered to make their own decisions
Right.
about what information they share.
And if borrowers have concerns about privacy or how this rule is being implemented, they should reach out to the CFPB directly.
Right.
The Bureau needs to hear from the people that this rule is supposed to help.
Yeah.
Their feedback is invaluable.
So don't be shy.
Right.
If you're a small business owner and you have thoughts or concerns about this rule, let the CFPB know.
Exactly.
They need to hear from you.
And for lenders, I think the message is clear. Be proactive.
Okay.
Be transparent and be collaborative. This rule is here to stay.
Right.
And the most successful institutions will be those that embrace its spirit and work to create a truly fair and inclusive lending market.
It sounds like this rule is about so much more than just collecting data.
Right.
It's about shifting the entire culture of small business lending, making it more transparent, more equitable, and more responsive to the needs of all borrowers.
You've hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
It's a fundamental shift in how we think about access to capital and who gets to participate in the American dream of entrepreneurship.
Right.
And it's a conversation that's just beginning.
You're right. This rule is just the first step in
Yeah.
a long journey toward creating a more just and equitable financial system.
Absolutely.
We need to stay engaged, stay informed, and keep pushing for progress.
Right.
Speaking of pushing for progress,
Yeah.
didn't the Bureau receive a lot of feedback
Yeah, they did.
on how this data could be used to actually improve things?
Right.
What were some of the key takeaways there?
One of the most common themes was the potential for this data to help identify and address credit gaps in underserved communities. By having granular information about where loans are being made and to whom, policymakers and community groups can pinpoint areas where resources are needed most. It takes the guesswork out of the equation and allows for more targeted and effective interventions.
It's not just about pointing fingers and calling out bad actors.
Right.
It's about actually providing solutions and support where it's needed most.
Yeah.
I like that.
Exactly. And some stakeholders also saw this data as a potential tool for encouraging innovation in the small business lending market.
Interesting.
By having a deeper understanding of the unique needs and challenges of different demographic groups, lenders can develop new financial products and services that are tailored to those needs.
So moving away from the traditional one-size-fits-all approach to lending and creating more customized solutions that meet the specific needs of different borrowers.
Precisely imagine a world where women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, and LGBTQI plus owned businesses have access to financial products designed specifically for their unique circumstances and challenges. That's the kind of innovation this rule could unlock.
That's a powerful vision.
Yeah.
And it could have a ripple effect throughout the economy.
Right.
Creating more jobs, more opportunities, and more prosperity for everyone.
That's the hope.
Yeah.
But of course, realizing those benefits will depend on how well the rule is implemented and how effectively the CFPB manages those privacy concerns we talked about earlier.
Right. The potential is there, but it's not guaranteed.
Exactly.
We need to stay vigilant and hold both the CFPB and lenders accountable for making this rule work as intended.
Absolutely. And that's where public engagement is so important.
Yeah.
We all have a role to play in shaping the future in small business lending.
I couldn't agree more. It's a collective effort.
Right.
And speaking of collective efforts, I'm curious about the Bureau's outreach to lenders. During the rulemaking process, did they uncover any specific challenges or concerns that lenders raised?
Absolutely.
Particularly those smaller institutions that might have fewer resources to comply with these new requirements.
The Bureau did extensive outreach, gathering input from lenders of all sizes, from tiny community banks to giant financial institutions. And they heard a lot about the potential costs and burdens of this rule, especially from those smaller lenders who might not have the same technological capabilities or staffing resources as their larger counterparts.
So not just theoretical concerns, but real-world anxieties from the folks who are actually going to have to implement this thing.
Exactly. One of the most common concerns revolved around technology. Many smaller lenders simply don't have the sophisticated systems in place to collect, store, and report this data in the way the rule requires. It's a potential tech gap.
That could make compliance challenging and costly for them.
That's a valid concern, and it highlights the importance of the CFPB providing support and guidance. Particularly for those smaller institutions that might be struggling to catch up.
Absolutely. And beyond technology, there were also concerns about training. Lenders need to train their staff on these new requirements. And that's going to take time and resources. Especially for smaller institutions with limited staff. This could be a significant burden.
And let's not forget the potential legal risks. Lenders are worried about being sued if they make mistakes with this data or if it's interpreted in a way that makes them look bad.
You're right. That's a real concern.
And
it underscores the need for clear guidance from the CFPB. Lenders need to understand exactly what's expected of them and what steps they can take to mitigate their risk.
It's a lot to navigate.
It is.
So what did the Bureau hear from lenders about potential solutions?
Or ways to make this rule more workable. Did any bright spots emerge from those conversations?
There were definitely some positive takeaways. Many lenders, even those who expressed concerns about the cost and burdens of the rule, acknowledged the importance of its goals. They recognized the need for greater transparency and accountability in the small business lending market. And they were willing to work with the CFPB to find ways to make the rule more effective and less burdensome.
So a sense of shared purpose, even if there's some disagreement. about the best way to achieve it.
Exactly. And that spirit of collaboration is crucial.
Yeah.
The Bureau can't do this alone.
Right.
They need to partner with lenders, listen to their concerns, and work together to find solutions that benefit both borrowers and lenders.
It's a two-way street.
Right.
Lenders need to be open to change and willing to invest in the systems and training needed to comply with the rule.
Yeah.
But the CFPB also needs to be flexible and responsive.
Right.
Providing clear guidance and support, especially for those smaller institutions that might be struggling to adapt.
I agree. It's about finding that sweet spot where we can achieve the goals of the rule without creating undue burdens or unintended consequences.
Right. And that's the art of good policymaking, isn't it?
Yeah.
Balancing competing interests, mitigating risks, and finding solutions that work for everyone.
Right.
It's not easy, but it's essential if we want to create a more just and equitable society.
Well said, and I think that's a great segue into our final segment,
where
we'll explore the broader implications of this rule and what it means for the future of small business lending.
I'm eager to continue this conversation and unpack what it all means for our listeners.
Yeah.
But for now, let's take a quick pause.
Okay.
And we'll come back refreshed for the final part of our deep dive. Okay, we're back and ready to kind of wrap things up here. We've covered a lot of ground, but what really stood out to me in all of this is the sheer ambition of what the CFPB is trying to do here.
Right.
This isn't just, a tweak to the system.
Yeah.
This is a fundamental shift in how we think about small business lending.
Absolutely. You're right. This is about reshaping the landscape, making it more transparent and equitable for all borrowers.
Yeah.
Especially those who've historically faced barriers.
Right.
So it's a bold move.
It is, but as we've discussed, there are valid concerns about, potential downsides.
Yeah.
Those compliance costs.
Right.
The possibility of higher interest rates or reduced access to credit.
Yeah.
And, of course, those ongoing privacy concerns.
Absolutely.
So it's a lot to balance.
It is crucial for the CFPB to stay engaged.
Right.
Monitor how this rule plays out in the real world and make adjustments as needed. This isn't a set it and forget it situation.
Right. They need to be responsive to both the lenders who are implementing the rule and the borrowers who are affected by it.
Absolutely.
It's about finding that balance.
Right.
Making sure the rule achieves its goals without creating undue burdens or unintended consequences.
Exactly. And it's also important for all of us as stakeholders in this process to stay informed and engaged.
Right.
We can't just passively wait for the CFPB to solve this problem on their own.
I love that it's a call to action for all of us.
Yeah.
So what does that look like in practice?
Okay.
What can our listeners do to be active participants in this process?
So if you're a small business owner, especially a woman, minority, or LGBTQI plus owner, knowledge is power.
Okay.
Understand this rule, what it means for you and your rights as a borrower.
Okay.
You'll likely be asked to provide demographic information when applying for a loan.
Right.
You can decline, but it's important to understand why that information is being collected and how it will be used.
So informed consent is crucial. No one should feel pressured to share sensitive information without understanding the context and implications.
Exactly. And if you have concerns about privacy or how the rule is being implemented, don't hesitate to reach out to the CFPB directly. They need to hear from small business owners about their experiences, both positive and negative.
It's about making your voice heard.
Right.
The CFPB needs that feedback to make sure this rule is working as intended.
And for lenders, the message is equally important. Be proactive and transparent. Embrace the spirit of this rule. Invest in the systems and training necessary to comply effectively. But go beyond mere compliance. Work with community groups. Understand the unique needs of different borrowers, and strive to create a truly fair and inclusive lending environment.
It sounds like collaboration is key here.
Yeah.
This isn't about lenders versus the CFPB.
Right.
It's about working together to achieve a common goal.
Right.
A more equitable and accessible lending market.
Right. Exactly. And that requires open communication, a willingness to learn and adapt, and a shared commitment to creating a system that works for everyone.
Okay, so we've talked about the practical steps that lenders and borrowers can take. But I'm also curious about the broader implications of this rule.
Okay.
What are the potential ripple effects that we might see in the financial system as a whole?
That's a great question. This rule has the potential to trigger a cascade of changes.
Okay.
Far beyond the immediate scope of small business lending.
Interesting.
For example, it could lead to a more nuanced understanding of creditworthiness.
Interesting. Tell me more about that.
Right now, credit scores are often the primary factor in lending decisions.
Right.
But they don't always tell the whole story, especially for those who have historically been excluded from traditional financial systems.
Right.
This rule, by collecting data on a wider range of factors, could help lenders develop more sophisticated and inclusive models for assessing creditworthiness.
So it's about moving beyond a narrow, often biased view of creditworthiness.
Yeah.
And recognizing that there are many different pathways to financial success.
Exactly. This data could help lenders identify alternative indicators of creditworthiness.
Okay.
Such as cash flow, business experience, or community ties.
Interesting.
This could open up new opportunities for borrowers who might not have stellar credit scores, but have other strengths that make them good credit risks.
It's about seeing the whole person, the whole business, rather than just a number on a screen.
Precisely, and that could lead to a more diverse and vibrant small business sector, where success is driven by innovation and hard work, not just by access to traditional forms of credit.
It's an exciting vision, and it speaks to the power of data
to
drive real systemic change.
It does.
But it's not just about the data itself.
Right.
It's about how we use that data to inform our decisions and create a more just and equitable world.
You're right. Data can be a powerful tool for good, but it's not a magic bullet.
Right.
It requires careful analysis, thoughtful interpretation, and a commitment to using that knowledge to create positive change.
And that brings us back to the importance of engagement and accountability.
Yeah.
We all have a role to play.
Right.
In ensuring that this data is used responsibly and that the benefits of this rule are shared widely.
I couldn't agree more. This is a collective effort.
Right.
And the success of this rule hinges on our willingness to stay informed, stay engaged, and hold both ourselves and our institutions accountable for creating a more just and equitable financial system.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I'm feeling energized and inspired
Me too.
by this conversation.
It's exciting to see this kind of bold action being taken to address systemic inequalities.
Yeah.
And it's inspiring to think about the potential ripple effects that this rule could have on the broader financial system.
It's a reminder that change is possible.
Yeah.
Even in complex and entrenched systems like the financial industry.
Right.
But it requires courage, collaboration, and a willingness to challenge the status quo.
Absolutely. And it requires all of us to stay informed, stay engaged, and keep pushing for progress.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thank you.
We hope you found it informative and thought-provoking.
As always, we encourage you to continue exploring this topic on your own. There's a wealth of information out there.
Right.
And the more you learn, the better equipped you'll be to navigate this complex and ever-changing landscape.
Excellent. Well said. Thanks again, everyone. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.